to all of you. Good morning, good afternoon to anybody joining from the other time zones as well. We're delighted to really have an opportunity today to have a discussion on a topic in some sense that's top of the mind for many. And it's also ironical that it's also the area that perhaps requires a lot of attention. So there is a sort of a paradox of sorts, and we will explore that a little bit. My name is Anant Krishnan. I'll work with the experts here, elicit a lot of those responses from them and opinions and points of view from them, and would encourage all of you to really provide your questions and whatever else so that we can get into a dialogue. So it's really a delight to have three experts together on the same panel. To start with, we have Vijayalakshmi Viji, obviously a very passionate coach, and much more than that. She's obviously had a fantastic consulting and management career. And in some sense, this may be her second career, or perhaps like the rest of them as well, a calling, an inner calling that led her to get into the coaching space. And wellness is an area I know for a fact she's very passionate about. So we welcome Viji into this conversation.
Thank you,
Um,
Anand.
we have John Serrao, again, who's played multifaceted roles in his corporate career, and then now playing a coach. And I really liked his tagline where he says his real endeavor right now is to enable people to be their best, both personally and professionally. And somebody who really believes quite a bit and really embodies the whole idea of wellness. So welcome, John, to this conversation. And last but not the least, Subhash, who's really the founder of Regal. And more importantly, he's somebody that is a healer beyond just being a coach, has had a corporate career prior to that. And one of the interesting things he indicated, above all, I'm also a dog parent, and he seems to be pretty proud of that. So we will really explore all that. So welcome to the conversation, Subhash. Wonderful. So I just want to get started to perhaps understand a little bit or establish a little bit about the boundary of this wellness itself. It's such a broad area, and there are so many reports. If we look at the global wellness report that had got published recently, it spoke about this being a $6.9 trillion. I don't even know how many zeros are there, but it just looks like a pretty big amount to me. And it's growing at a rapid pace at about 6% or so. So, which means wellness obviously is a space that everybody would like to be. And it's got different dimensions within that. They've spoken through all of that. But I want to really get your perspectives around what does wellness really mean and what might constitute as components of this large economy out there. So what would it mean, Viji, from your, I'll start off with you, when you think about wellness itself? It's a good idea to get a boundary for the scope of this area.
Yeah, that's, you've set a very tough question to start with, right? Because putting a boundary onto something that is quite boundaryless is a difficult task. But, I'm not going to play spoil sport. Let me attempt that. And, Anand, I want to also acknowledge, before I came in today, starting point for this dialogue and this conversation was really what we had in January, the LinkedIn Live. And for those of you who have not, listened to it or checked it out, even if I say so myself, please do go give it a listen. We had some great, I would say, fundamental level conversations. And you asked me that there as well in terms of how do I look at wellness. So let me start with that, Anand. I think and really the difference between health and wellness, right, is that it's a difference between the way of being and typically an end state. Yeah. So just a lack of infirmity need not necessarily mean either that you're in good health or, leave alone wellness, right? Even that you're in good health. And I think what I've always found very meaningful about, and that's why I say it's boundaryless, because it is a conscious and, a self-directed process of really achieving one's full potential. Yeah. And so you can do so many different things under that umbrella. You can have a physical dimension of it. You can have an emotional dimension. You can have a financial dimension. You can have a spiritual dimension, which I know is Subhash's favorite. You can have a social dimension to it. Now, all of these come within. So, so I would just say a discourse on wellness or a dialogue on wellness really can be anything that enables a human being to live a full life in alignment with what the possibilities can be for them. And I would like to set that as a frame of reference and a boundary. And I know you mentioned the word industry, or I mean, you throw in a few big numbers, and absolutely, I would say at least since 2020, there's this huge boom that's happened, and most people, whether they do it or not, are at least conscious and aware. That I've got to pay attention to A, B, and C. Today, most people who are not even adults are speaking about mental health very casually. Now, this goes to just say that there is a lot of awareness and the narrative is shifting slowly but steadily. So I think anything that touches upon, these sort of layers and dimensions of wellness that I just called out, which is certainly not exhaustive, all contribute to that industry in one way or the other. But if you look at wellness coaching, that's a completely different thing. But I'm going to hold here and
We'll
allow
come to that. Yeah.
Subash and John to jump in about their understanding and boundary conditions of wellness before we then maybe look into the level of coaching. So I hope this was okay to get things started.
Absolutely. And out, I think some nuanced distinction, or at least alluded to that, the difference possibly between health and wellness. So maybe, John, I'll get started with that question. Do you see a difference between the two, and what would be the real difference when you think about wellness in the context of health itself?
Yeah. So before that, Anant, trillion has got 12 zeros.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I like what Vijay said, that really this is all about being all encompassing. And in many ways, health would therefore be a subset of wellness. Whereas the superset would be that there are so many different dimensions and elements that make up what is called as wellness, as it were, right? In fact, one of my favorite studies that I often keep referring to is the Harvard, the longitudinal study on happiness and what constitutes happiness, as opposed to, one where you look at the blue zones in the world and look at longevity, right? Which is really about health. But what constitutes happiness? And I'm very intrigued by how the social dimension plays such a big role there, right? But again, that is one aspect of the whole aspect of wellness. So I would, concur with Vijay that there is a lot more to wellness than just simply health, or simply one dimension of our being, as opposed to this being a multifaceted, what shall I say, interplay of sorts.
So there's a lot to mull over. There's a lot to think about within that. And Vijay did allude to the fact that in some sense it's a self-responsibility of sorts, and yet influenced by all these other factors. And there is an interplay, John, which you're talking about as well. So Subhash, I think being a coach and also a healer, it'll be interesting to hear your perspective about what would wellness mean to you.
Yeah, just to build on, thanks everyone, all the panelists and Anant for this. I think this is a topic, we don't discuss enough, we don't explore enough. And thanks, Vijay. Vijay took the initiative saying that we should have a longer session. For me, wellness, I agree with John that, that physical health is just part of the larger wellness. I fully agree with that. I also, kind of inspired by what Vijay said, linking it back to potential. We are so used to, potential in the context of coaching, right? I say definition of coaching. So if I have to break it down, what is wellness for me? I just build on what Vijay said. For me, it is physical for sure. It starts with physical, then it is mental, emotional, then social. And then it's also creative, something that I picked up from Marcia's work of late. And that resonates so much that, I mean, incidentally, I know John also, his love for jazz. And I don't know, Vijay and Anand, you share anything in the creative space. There is that creative element in us that needs nurturing. So creative wellness is as important. And then it is, of course, spiritual wellness. So all these together make up wellness for me, the way I look at it. Another way is that, the whole Annamaya Kosha to Anandamaya Kosha, or the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's another perspective that I'm fascinated, because Maslow, it seems, later clarified that, that self-actualized need is not fully self-realized, or, like Buddha, like it's just living up to your full potential, which resonates for us as coaches. Yeah. Another thing that just came up when John was sharing in the moment is also going beyond the body consciousness. So it is wellness even without any of this wellness. So it's like you're in the society but not affected by the society. That just came up for me. So that body consciousness is the ultimate in spiritual context across faiths and religions. So that's also another interesting thing that just came up to me, in the moment. Yeah, that's
Very, very interesting. So you did speak about the dimensions of, physical, mental, emotional, social, and typically we would associate physical with the body and perhaps mental with the mind. And yet you also connected the idea of the body consciousness, which could be ultimate. Is there any sort of hierarchy of sorts between mind and body as when you relate to wellness perspective?
so. For me, I always looked at it as hierarchical from an Annamaya Kosha, that is food and basic needs, to Anandamaya Kosha. But looking at the Gen Z and the younger crowd, they can talk about porn on one side, they can talk about ultimate spirituality on the other side. So I generally feel it's in our mind. There's nothing like hierarchical about these elements.
Different dimensions.
Yeah.
John, what's been your perspective in terms of when you became conscious and when you started really looking at health seriously? Was there one dimension that appealed to you more than the other dimensions, and did you get started on that journey and slowly built up the rest of them?
So, Anant, for me, being fit, being healthy or exercising for that matter, has been actually a lifelong passion. It's not something that I've been doing, for the last 5 or 10 or 15 years, but all my life I've been, doing something or the other. In fact, just to share a small story with you all, I have just recovered. I'm just recovering from a hernia surgery 2 weeks back, and the only thing that I can do is walk. So today I've been walking. I've walked 3 times already, after breakfast, after lunch, just before our call, because there's nothing else I can do. And, I'm one of those guys who does a lot of things. So for me, it's a mindset. It's like I don't give myself an option, for quote unquote not exercising. It doesn't exist. In fact, for me, the biggest question that I had for my doctor is that when do I get back to my golf and my gym and my, all my other activities? And, and he told me, you have to wait for 6 weeks. So for me, that has been hard.
So in some sense, your foundational element is perhaps the physical
Absolutely.
wellness.
Always. Yeah. It's
And
always.
how has it impacted the other dimensions of your wellness? How has the physical one, where you're very active, very passionate about, how does it seem to impact the mental, the emotional aspects of your wellness?
Yeah. So, the thing is, if you think about the body, for example, because if you look at it, while we have the mind and we have the soul, and you can go into all of those elements, but it's the body that houses all the elements, right? And if you don't take care of that body, which is responsible for so many things, then you are in effect putting a lot of things at risk, right? Which means things like learning, for example, right? Or being able to, let's say, pick up a child, for example, or let's say help somebody on the road, for example, right? So the fact that you're physically fit um, has its impact on many broad areas of your life. In fact, one of the things that my wife and I were talking about is that, if we are physically fit, that's a good gift for our children, because it is one less thing for our children to worry about. Right? And we don't ever think of it that way, right? But, our children have their own worries, have their own problems, have their own, career worries or what have you. And if you add to that sickly parents, that can be quite demanding on them. And I've had for whatever reasons, I've had to take care of parents who are not well, right? So I can see how important it is for us because this element actually spills onto, multi dimensions. If you're fit, you can sleep better, you can work better, you have more energy, more stamina. You can go on for longer periods of time. Your energy doesn't flag, right?
So creating a sense of autonomy within your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, that's interesting. So Vijay, again, as you alluded initially to these dimensions, do you see from an awareness perspective across the broader spectrum, some elements of wellness seem to have a better identification, a deeper understanding, while some others have not yet as yet matured, though its impact on our overall constitution is still very high. So is there a sense where you feel the level of awareness is differing for the different dimensions of wellness?
Were you looking into my wellness coaching notes, Anant? So, because this is something that I have noted over a period of time. So I do a lot of, if you may loosely call it, wellness coaching. And we spoke about leadership wellness coaching last time. And typically one of the questions that would come in, I mean, there are some tools, assessments, dipsticks and all that, which, sometimes we do administer. And there would be these various dimensions, and some dimensions you pretty much know going by the group. Yeah, it's a largely mid-level corporate group, kind of, right? Without, I know you're not supposed to be judgmental, but you broadly know how the stats are going to look like, yeah, where the challenges would come. I mean, it's pretty much predictable. I'm not saying that it's one size fits all, but yeah, I have been noticing this. But but before that, Anand, with your permission, can I take a stab at what John and Subash were
Sure.
talking about these dimensions personally? And I'll start with my own life and the way I look at it before I then answer your question on how I find the awareness or appetite for these dimensions. Um, like John, I have always grown up on activity. I have led my life. For me, long before I think gyms and everything were fashionable, right? When everybody kind of, does it because it needs to be done. I think forever I have been like that. So I would have done a double take on what John said. One, because everything is housed to the body, but also because the body never lies. Anything else you can fool yourself. You can't, right? I mean, what the scale reads is what the scale reads, right? What your what some other, some reps on an exercise tell you, whether you can hold a 2-minute plank or not even a 10-second plank, tells you a lot. Now, so I would have, that's how I used to look at it, right? I mean, you set your body right. If all else fails, yeah, if there are 6 dimensions, you can just work on one, pick the body, because it's foundational. Like Subash said, it is a strong foundation on which everything is built. But in recent years, and this comes from my work in wellness coaching with others and even with myself, I've realized there's one other dimension that is super critical. And if you fix that, even the work you do on your body or the physical dimension just seamlessly becomes so much more of a joy, becomes so much, you don't really look at it as something that has to be done, right? And I know a lot of people are not like me or John, who by disposition love activity and fitness and sport and everything, right? So for them it's hard, I know that. And that dimension is the emotional dimension. And I'm discovering this more and more, especially being a woman who is, aging, right, at a certain life stage. I realize that emotional dimension is actually the big one, right? Now, if, let us say, you're not happy, I know we spoke about happiness earlier, or something is off, you're sad, you're dealing with difficult emotions, it is the hardest thing to make your body listen to you. And I say this in the safety of the room. In recent years, and John, you may be surprised about this, because that may be a bit of a shock to you, because I've been the kind of person who has never given up on my kettlebell training through the pandemic, right, through those days. But there are days where I do not feel like exercising. Yeah. And this sort of leads to almost like an identity crisis for me, because I'm like, who's this person, right? Why am I not enjoying that? And then I beat myself up, which was never the purpose of activity and exercise in my life, because it was a source of joy, like it is for John. So it's really important to address those pieces. And I found also, again, with work with clients, there's one dimension each of us, and probably the most fluid dimension, right? I mean, for a physical fitness regimen, you can actually break it down and say, okay, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. But managing emotional well-being is not that straightforward. Yeah, it's dependent on others, it's dependent on relationships, it depends on the world outside, it depends on the war situation, God knows, right? But yet it is the most critical, because if that's not in place, everything else, like we say in coaching, would be transactional. If you want all other dimensions to go transformationally, it's very important to be aware of your emotional well-being and try your best to I think, have it in a good place.
Interesting point. So maybe Subash, I want to explore this a little bit with you. The idea of emotional well-being and the role it plays. I come back again to the sense of awareness. Not all of us may be aware at the same stage or the same level of depth about the role of emotions and when it comes and what is the impact of that. How does one sense it? Is there an internal sensor that sort of gives us a signal to say that, hey, this is an area that at least you should be sensitive about, you should be conscious about, you should be cautious about, and so on, from an emotional perspective?
So I want to underline what I think Vijay said, the body never lies. I think, we don't listen to our body enough. These days people talk about the gut is a second brain. I mean, I would, on a lighter vein, would say your brain is a second gut, right? If you really look at it that way. So every cell in your body is vibrating at a certain frequency, right? And are we truly listening? We had, she's not here today, one of our coaches who said, at the end of a PC's journey, we said, pick out one big takeaway. She said, I'm listening to my body better. And she's, into yoga and those practices. So, it's that empathy in action. It's that emotional intelligence, to answer your question, Anant. How much I'm aware, and this is not taught to us, right? I know empathy, I heard of empathy, I think, in my business school. It was just theory. And whole our leadership was, it was all theory. It's only in the coaching journey that we really, started realizing what is emotional intelligence and deeper. And we thought it was always about putting ourselves in the other's shoes. That is barely scratching the surface of emotional intelligence. So that is one way. If we are emotionally intelligent as leaders and coaches, half the battle is won. Then it is responding to that, taking action. CC8. Also, when Vijay was talking about, CC2 came up for me. The mindset, right? It's ultimately the mindset. For me, that is the crux of all coaching competencies, coaching mindset.
Very interesting. So we have almost seamlessly moved into the area of coaching. So I'm going to go back to John on this one. So we spoke a little bit about the idea of awareness, and we established that body never lies, and the fact that the emotional intelligence definitely has a role to play. What are some of the barriers as a coach that you see with some of the potential coachees in really responding or building that awareness for themselves about wellness?
This is about you, or this is about your coachee?
About your coachee. How, as a coach, have you been, based on your experiences, what are some of the observations or perspectives that you might have about potential barriers that exist with coachees and becoming aware of some of these signs? And then, of course, we'll go into how do they action on that, if at all.
When you say signs, what do you mean by that, Anant?
The signals we spoke about, body never lies. If that is universally true, then all of us would actually be working towards that.
Yeah.
And yet we go through a coaching journey to really become well-rounded from a wellness perspective. So there's something that seems to be a barrier. So how does one, what are those barriers to start with based on your experiences?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, this thing about knowing one's body or knowing one's emotions, or even knowing that the fact that you're triggered are things that don't come naturally. We don't come out of our mother's wombs all emotionally wired up, right? It's a skill that you start building up, right? And if you think about what Daniel Goleman talks about in emotional and social intelligence, emotional intelligence is nothing but knowing yourself and then managing yourself.
Yeah.
And knowing what's happening to others and managing
Social.
the
Yeah.
relationship, right? And I think, these are skills that are not taught to us in schools. We are given what we call as skills that have to do with the cognitive, but we are never ever taught of how to manage emotions, manage relationships, manage the dynamics in relationships, which is why when people come to that stage in their life where they are managing teams, is where they start encountering those problems. Like this afternoon, I had a coaching session with somebody who is in a pharma organization, 16 years, has a team of 34. Two people are not performing. And he's afraid to say what I spoke to him openly, right? And that's because of fears, emotional, how will the other person manage, and all kinds of fears, some of which are rational, some of which are irrational. So many of us are actually not clued into our own emotions, right? And therefore, we all need to train ourselves to do that. It's even harder with our bodies because, when you tell somebody, what are you feeling in your body? It's like an obtuse question. I mean, what kind of question is that, right? And yet, our body talks. But when people start listening to it, I've had situations when I started doing this with one particular coachee. And I asked him, how are you feeling? And, in terms of your body sensation. And he said, my body is very tight. My shoulders are all crunched up. It's like the, weight on my head and all of that. And in 2 or 3 sessions, the moment he would sit down, he would start with his body. And he would tell me, John, I'm feeling this. And by the middle of the session, John, I'm feeling nice and cool and relaxed. My, arms are feeling light and all of that. So I think it's also this awareness. It's like, building that muscle of recognition. Now, if you look at psychology and if you look at what they say about emotions, that to tame an emotion, you have to name the emotion.
Correct.
Right? You need to. And if you look at the emotional wheel,
The
there are
vocabulary itself,
words to describe emotion, but our vocabulary is very stunted there.
Correct. So it's really being able to name, as you rightly said, right? Then to be able to surface it and then to be able to address it. So there are multiple steps.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question from Satyajit here. He says it needs deep dive in the coaching session as leaders, Indian leaders especially, consciously or unconsciously hide emotions behind something. So in a way, he's saying in the less time that we have as a coach, how do we even draw some of these out in the coaching conversations? So maybe I'll first start with you, John, and then go to Vijay on this question. So it's really, he's saying the emotional intelligence is absolutely the relevant point.
Yeah.
And yet within that coaching conversation that we have and the time allocated, and given the fact that the coaches may not necessarily be open to that, how does one draw that?
This is a great question, actually. So, I want to, lean on the, learnings from my good friend, and some of you know him very well, Dr. Carl Rogers. And he talks in his client-centered therapy about this whole aspect about what he calls as congruence, right? And congruence is nothing but being outside what you feel inside. And many of us as human beings are afraid to share our emotions, are afraid to share how we deeply feel inside. But that's the heart. Vulnerability is at the heart of, building trust. And therefore, as coaches, we got to role model vulnerability. We got to role model being able to share our emotions. We got to role model some of these things, even at the risk of our clients wondering what's going on, or even at the risk of us upsetting our clients, right? And if we are able to get to that point, then hopefully our clients will see that, our coaches will see that, and they might be able to then reflect back some of that role modeling back to us and be able to open up. Because if you look at even today, if you look at what CEOs need, if you look at what leaders need, it's not the IQ, because the IQ is a given. Without that
That's
IQ,
why they're there. Yeah.
but now what you need is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to be able to understand some of these nuances at that level, you can't be a successful leader.
Yeah. Any tips, Vijay, from your perspective in terms of how do you draw the coachee into this conversation?
Then I just love what John said, and I want to build on that. And before that, one step backward, which is John spoke about taking risk, being vulnerable, role modeling, and all that, which is fantastic. And I'll talk about that in just a bit. But all of this, the permission to do all of this is trust. So Satyajit, I think, and this is not you, I'm speaking generically. And let's kind of look at it, right? When would you open up to somebody about your deepest emotions? If at all you can open up. It's when you trust, when you feel safe, when you know I can be a fool and this guy is not going to judge me. Yeah. And especially for leaders, because their whole identity is about being these people who are strong, who are infallible, who are bulletproof, and all that, right? So for such a person to really come vulnerable or even acknowledge, I think the foundation is trust. And oftentimes I also find this with coaches that we jump too quickly into getting to the heart of the matter when we've not built that trust. And trust is not something that you do in the discovery call or session 1. It's forever, right? So in a sense, I almost, every new session, even with an old client, is always, I spend some time. Obviously, I'm not going to say, okay, this is trust building section, but there is a conscious effort to, I think, uphold that trust, to validate that trust, to underscore that trust in every session, in between sessions. And then that gives me the permission to do, as John said, take that risk. So what I would do specifically, and I encounter a lot of such leaders, and especially the more we go on top, this does emerge, and for very valid reasons, is if I feel something and I feel something being held back, so for example, 2 days ago, I had a client who walked into the session and didn't tell me anything, but absolutely looking distraught. Yeah. Now, if I did not have a trusting relationship, I couldn't have done what I did. The first thing I said was, and he wanted to get quick into business as usual and, kind of pick up stuff, what we did, home task. I said, hold on. And I actually said that. I said, you look very fatigued today. What's the problem? And the risk there is that the person could have kind of said, how does it matter, right? I mean, hopefully none of my clients would say that. They know I come from a space of care. Is not to do it in a judging way. It's not like the question that most women hate, right? Saying, oh my God, you put on weight, right? I mean, obviously I can't say that to a client. Oh my God, you're looking so tired, right? It is coming from that space of care. And when I asked that, something shifted. And the entire session, we only spoke about that fatigue. So either that's got to come out on its own. So there are two ways. If it comes to a point where you can't contain it anymore, it's going to spill, right? I mean, that's why sometimes you have emotional outbursts in sessions, which we may not even be equipped to handle at that point of time. The other way is if you pick something, you pick either something being held back or, what you said, if you even find an emotion being hidden, I would just say, from a complete space of caring, play it out, pick that up, from a place of care, built on a space of trust. The worst that can happen is either the client kind of, gets really upset with you, or actually says, yes, and I've had this also. Yes, I'm going through a really difficult time, with my teenage kids, for example, and, I'm going crazy. I don't even know what I'm doing, as a parent. But you know what? I want to keep that outside the session. That's fine. Right? At least we've got that out. We've put it out there. We've decided to park it. My job as a coach is not to ensure, emotional closure on everything for the client, what they want to do, and they may choose to park it. There are many things in life. The best solution is to park it and move ahead, right? So I do that. And finally, the point on role modeling that John spoke about, that's my favorite. And that is my maturity and evolution as a coach as well, Anand. I don't know whether I would have done this a couple of years back when I started out. Is today, especially because in the last few years, my my journey with wellness is having a lot of peaks and troughs, some amazing peaks, but some crazy troughs as well. So what I do is I own that. So there are days when I'm not completely okay. There is a lot happening in my background, and I role model that and I call it out. And actually say, because clients are very quick to pick up as well. They know when you've not slept enough. They know when you're probably hungry. They know when you're not exuberant, your exuberant self. They just know you as much as you think you know them. So in all fairness, I acknowledge it, saying that there's something going on, but that's okay. Yeah, I still want to be here and show up for this session today. So then that role modeling then comes back. The client feels safe to do that the next time around.
Veronica, I think your question, is it getting answered? It's about normalizing vulnerabilities. And I think we've had some interesting conversations about how it is okay to do that, right? And really get down into this as well. Yeah, being vulnerable is always a risky proposition. Um, it's very interesting. So you spoke about obviously the physical part of the wellness, and we connected it to the emotional part of the wellness. I want to briefly just probe all of you on the mental side of that, the mental piece of the wellness as well. Where does that come in this equation? And in your coaching tenure as you coach, does that ever come into the fore? Does it become part of a conversation in wellness coaching? The physical dimension, we may be able to set up goals. We are able to get to understand why it is important for them. We connected with emotions, so I think vulnerabilities in some sense address that as well. Mental, there is a sort of a possible stigma associated with even bringing it up in some form and shape. So I'm just curious to know, is that even a dimension that comes into the conversation around wellness, especially as a coach? Any of you?
My short answer is a lot of the younger clients are so comfortable talking about it. I recently met a potential client who said, I've taken a mental health break from my organization. I said, that's a thing. I mean, you actually said that to your organization? Says, yeah, I said that to my organization. I've taken a mental health break. I find that very empowering, to be with younger clients for whom it's extremely, I think, normal to be able to talk about it. So I think that's where the intergenerational differences come as well. So yeah, Subash, John, you can add your experiences, and I'm going to think on this one and answer how it shows up in my sessions.
Yeah, no, Anand, today I think it's very normal. I mean, I can't imagine when I was the CFO of a company to discuss my mental health. I didn't know how to spell mental health back then. But today, I think it's it's in our lexicon, it's in our dictionaries. People feel comfortable talking about it. In fact, to get appointments from therapists is nowadays hard. They are like fully booked out all the time.
Yeah.
So I can see the demand for them, and I'm happy people are reaching out to them. And I think one of the things that we as coaches, particularly have that benefit is because of the fact that even in our training, there is so much of peer coaching that we need to do with each other, that by the time we actually finish off as coaches, you have by and large, taken care of a lot of your mental, health issues, because you've just talked to people, right? Talk to coaches about it. So in many ways, although, coaching is not therapy, but the fact of the matter is that you are able to talk. You're able to talk about, issues and all of that. But I think today it is normal. I don't think there is any stigma to that. I don't think people look at it surprised. I think people, and I'm personally taking therapy for things that I want, and I have no shame in admitting it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Subhash, any perspectives on that?
Yeah. So for me, all these come into play, Anand. Whether it is, I mean, I would say at the chemistry level itself, one of my standard question is, what is your fitness regimen? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? I'm very curious to know how much they prioritize health, because we are working with leaders, senior leaders, successful leaders under a lot of stress. We're not taking care of your basic health. For me, it's a red flag. Right? I would like to know. And even I go up to the creativity, my regal at 60 and the hobby, these are all my obsessions, your travel. And I do spend time with every client. So start with physical at the early stage, mental, emotional do come up. And I just met second session. The first one was virtual. The second, I just met day first yesterday, a new client. And I liked what Vijay also said about the trust. So when we finished the session in the coffee shop, we stepped out. Then he says, dad is going through a cancer treatment, wife has some health issues. And he's a sales head. And with all the sales target, I'm juggling. And one of the things that he said, I'm not disciplined on those things that he had agreed to do, right, in the first session, including physical fitness. But so that also, it's not about driving the client on these parameters, just making the client aware, start experimenting, journaling, for example, and then find a rhythm that will work for them. So, but for me, I really like the point that Vijay spoke about the emotional content. Now, for me, the whole thing around visualization is that level. Whether I don't know whether it is Manomaya Kosha or something else, but that plays a very critical role, right? So to that extent, yeah, in my engagements, these are all very integral to every client relationship. And another point I want to just add on to what Vijay also said. Claire said something in the last webinar. We say that this is a safe space.
Correct.
She said,
I
can you
remember that.
guarantee it?
Yeah.
It's not a safe space, she said. So beautiful, such a powerful lesson I learned in that. Similarly, we also say this session is confidential, right? And we are talking in front of the cohort or the larger group. Is it really truly confidential? Don't people talk about it? So these are kind of things that that also builds trust. So the point I wanted to just underline what Vijay said is, I think that is relevant to every relationship. And some of the most important relationships in our lives, we take them for granted, whether it is spouse, kids, parents, for sure, sometimes even pets, right? So yeah, so as we just said, everything for me, it's not even binary 0-1. Every interaction is a plus or a minus. So the trust building is so very important in any relationship.
And you alluded to Regal at 60. You also mentioned the fact that all dimensions are integral. And maybe I'll go to John with this. I think the area of financial health, we probably didn't explicitly allude to that, but I would presume that it's also one of the dimensions because they're all integral and interconnected as well. So, John, as somebody who's been in that space, I would like to start off with you and then hear the perspectives from others.
Yeah, thanks, Anant. Like we discussed, and we talked about wellness as the overarching umbrella, and one of the components of that also happens to be financial health. And if you look at the world today, and we meet a lot of people, I find very few people who are actually mindful of being financially healthy. And one of the things I'm discovering is that there is a strong correlation between people who are financially healthy and actually doing well in their careers. So it's very interesting. I mean, you would think that it should be maybe inversely proportional, but it's actually directly proportional. Because the moment they find peace in their finances, they relax in their careers. And then automatically they are on a hypo path. They are on a path to director or a VP or what have you, because they're not worried about the financial angle. And there is a case that I'm currently coaching, young person, maybe in his early 30s. He's on track to become financially free by 42. And he's on a fast career track in his organization. And this guy happened to have attended one of my personal finances seminars some 12 years ago, worked on it. And then when he had a chance to select me as a coach, selected me because of that session.
Wonderful.
But
Yeah.
but he's in good shape, and I was like amazed to see that, And so I think side by side, because today we live in a culture of credit cards and easy loans, and on an app like today now, what is it? Geo is offering 1 crore loans in a few minutes and all that. Money is available, right? And I think
perhaps it speaks to that, one of my favorite equations in coaching, which is the performance is equal to potential minus interference.
yes,
And perhaps the fact that the financial wellness could, if the wellness is not there, it could become an interference, and therefore we
Absolutely.
are unable to perform at our peak potential. So what you're really saying is, I think if you have that financial security, financial wellness, at least one dimension of interference is lowered.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Vijay, I want to come back to your area of specialization as well, right? I think we've spoken a lot about the individual, their awareness
Mm.
about some of these dimensions and potential barriers within that. Now, what and for leaders, it's not just about them alone. It's really their impact on the larger teams, about the organization. So, what has been your experience about their awareness of this dimension? Not just how does it impact me, but how does it impact the larger ecosystem in which I operate, because I have a larger span of influence from a wellness perspective?
Yeah. Great question, Anant. I think something all of us should think about. And this also forms the basis for systemic work, right? When we talk about systemic coaching, this is systemic coaching in action. You make a difference to one, it actually has tangible, not just an imaginary effect, but a very tangible effect on the ecosystem that they're part of. But before that, a little on the lighter vein to what John said. John, this proportional equation that you called out, is that true for coaches as well? I was thinking.
In which
We can,
equation? You mean
between your career and your financial health.
I don't know. You have to answer. You tell me, Vijay.
That's a good question. You had me thinking. So maybe you should coach me on that later. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I couldn't help that because I was like, this must be true for coaches as well. Right. So yeah. So Anant, I think leaders know that, right? So for example, if they invest in themselves, they are healthier, they prioritize well-being, they have a balance in what they do, it is going to affect others. But what they don't realize is the power of that. Okay. It's a little bit like executive presence. It's like a little bit about leadership behaviors, right? The way a mindset that Subash had mentioned a little while ago. We don't realize how much, the leadership behaviors or non-behaviors or mindset actually starts, or a leader's presence actually can impact the morale, the engagement, the culture of the very place. They got to see it to believe it. So leadership investment in wellness is something like that, which is why in a lot of the engagements that come for more systemic wellness interventions, or like let's say more cultural, or kind of do I would say wellness shifts for an entire business or a team or something, my first question will be to say, how much is the leader invested in this? There's no point HR or anybody else rallying around for this if the person who is leading that entire business or organization is not willing to walk that talk along with others and walk that path, however hard that may be. Okay. So success, and talking about proportion, it's directly proportional. Okay. How much it happens. So one of my efforts I always make is to try to do one-on-one work, or at least work in parallel with that leader. And when that starts showing results, cascading effect, that's like proof of the pudding to see this totally works. Because the one thing it affects, apart from all of the measurable stuff, is culture. The wellness culture is a very powerful culture because it says you care. You can't invest in wellness without caring for somebody. Yeah. So when leaders do that, it's much more than they can imagine, though it's quite a no-brainer, to know that it's like a head of a family, right? When parents, and John spoke about children, parents being responsible children. Another build on that is, as they're raising, right? Not about old age. When father and mother, or let's say parents, whoever the guardians are, they are investing in certain thing, whether it's nutrition or activity or spirituality, there's no way it's not going to translate into impacting the children in the house. So in a manner of speaking, it's like that. Actions speak far louder than words. And you don't realize the power of parenting till you actually be one and see the results, right? You see, oh my God, this was my work, something like that. So I think leaders must realize it for themselves. And as coaches, if we can actually work at that level, it really is going to set us up for success for the rest of the organization.
It sounds very similar to one of the points that John had made for for us to be able to draw some of these from the coachee, we need to show ourselves as vulnerable. We need to role model. And it
Yeah.
feels like at another level, the leader has to role model wellness for themselves to really bring in that culture within the organization as well. So again, to ask you the question, what are some of the barriers? And again, John, maybe I'll start with you on this. What are some of the barriers you've seen in that, where the the leaders have to truly role model wellness in order to cascade that culture across the organization and really make a huge impact in terms of their individual productivity and overall organizational performance as well?
Yeah. So, Anant, the way I would respond to this is that it's really hard for leaders to do this at every level, because some of them have a proclivity for something. Some might be physical fitness. Some might be relationship, for example. Like, for example, I remember, when I was heading finance in this company called Verifone, the chairman of the company based in the US, Hatim Tayyib, he would, whenever, no matter where he traveled in the world, he would always call his wife up every day. She was his anchor. And he made no bones about it. He would talk about it. And therefore, that so-called familial, culture started cultivating in the organization. I've known others, like, for example, I remember being offered for the job at Aditi Technologies as like their head of finance. The guy called Pradeep Singh was like a marathoner, and everybody there was running.
So they do role model, right?
They do
Actively.
role model. Yeah.
Yeah,
They
that's
do role
interesting.
model. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it may not be on every dimension. That's really hard for leaders to do. But even if they can pick up some of the big dimensions, like, whether it's rest or health or, let's say, family or a hobby, for example, or like 3M. I used to work in a company called 3M, and they used to give us 15% time to work on something completely undocumented.
Completely, yeah. And
Yeah.
and that may be to do with this creativity piece that Subhash had alluded to
That's
some time back.
correct.
The
That's a
creativity.
creativity piece. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it all depends upon different organizations that do that. At least that's what I've encountered in terms of leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Uh,
maybe my esteemed fellow panelists might have some better examples of that.
I was wondering who you're talking about. Esteemed fellow
You,
panelists. I was
Vijay,
looking
and
at
Subhash.
Suddenly you woke them up.
Subash. Let's pass it to
So
Subash.
leading by example, absolutely, John is spot on. I've seen somebody, one of my direct boss who used to be a voracious reader. It just trickled down. Because he would carry a book always, he would in travel,
Yeah.
he would talk about it. Suddenly, it just naturally picked up. I know so many marathon running CEOs we know, who are encouraging their senior team and others to run. So it does trickle down for sure. Yeah. Management by example, role modeling works in parenting as well as, I think, in leadership. Yeah.
But I just want to add one disclaimer here, right? And I'm just thinking aloud with John and Subash. It rarely works when it's prescriptive. So I find all these, campaigns where somebody is like heavily, sort of saying, do 10,000 steps or whatever, right? It's not a one size fits all. One is orientation. Some people may have orientation to certain things. And obviously, from an organizational standpoint, there is also some pecking order, right? You want people to basically be physically fit. Otherwise, you can't have medical incidents and other things, right? Which is something nobody wants. But that being said, being prescriptive, whether it is in the coaching space, and that's why we need to contain ourselves, and especially for coaches who are, like John and Subhash, and maybe me, who are very mindful, and a whole lot of others. I mean, I see Shiba here. Is the temptation? I know we don't give advice, but even the how do I put this, right? Even a little slip from us, that we're looking at a prescriptive solution here, or it's kind of saying, oh my god, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, you got to lose weight, you have to do. No, it's not a no-brainer. We don't know what the battle they're fighting is. We really have no clue. So very important, not to go. You can role. So I want to call out the nuance between, you can role model, but don't prescribe. Yeah. And if a leader can actually have that beautiful balance of being a role model, but not a prescriptive leader when it comes to something so personal as wellness, I think something amazing would happen to that organization, to that culture. As with coaches, if as a coach, you can role model in your own little ways that you care, that you don't have to write a book on well-being for your clients to understand that. Well, great if you can, but just saying. So, but the little things that you prioritize, right? The little things that they see you, the little things that they observe of you. That's again great role modeling, but never prescriptive.
That's the piece of being, right? That's a piece of being instead of just exhorting others
Yeah,
to do.
yeah, yeah.
So as we come to the end of this conversation, I think if others who are listening, if you have any questions, please do let us know. In the meanwhile, any other points that any of the panelists would like to share? As we really get to the end of this conversation, anything in conclusion, anything that we've missed out that you think is appropriate to highlight?
Yeah, so one of the things, Anant, I want to bring up is, if you remember, I had spoken about that Harvard study and how important social connections are. And I don't mean social connections of the likes of Facebook or LinkedIn and those type, but where you have face-to-face conversations, right? Make friendships, making time for a coffee or a meal or, walks together or what. I think those social connections are extremely powerful in helping us in our happiness quotient, but also in our longevity quotient. And I think and I think that came to life during COVID when people were so,
Correct.
Isolated.
Isolated, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an element that we don't often think of. And it's not about having 10,000 friends and those kind of things, but it's really having those few good friends that you can talk to, have a meal with, have a good laugh, be yourself, for example.
Unconditional, yeah.
Yeah. And that takes time. It takes effort. It takes cultivation, and then you can have those long friendships.
Fantastic. I think it's
Beautiful.
that's a beautiful piece. Subhash, any final pearls of wisdom from you?
When Vijay was talking about, the general background and other stuff, one word came up to me also about the belief that we carry. And perhaps our generation is in that, stuck between parents' generation and kids' generation. Our kids are far more sorted on the belief things, like, finance, for example. I think we still carry some baggage from our early childhood experience, which thankfully our kids don't carry. Or even this generation has not seen that struggle, right? All are born post 1991 when the economy opened. So beliefs also has something that we can't ignore, which is very root. And the point that Vijay said about what everyone is battling it out. So we can't be prescriptive about wellness. You can't ask somebody struggling with something to go and run a marathon or hit a gym. So it is very personal.
Very personal. So on that note, I think we will end this
Anant,
conversation.
may I just
Please.
throw in
Okay.
one last word?
Yeah, do.
Today is the day where I'm really, doing the plus ones on John and Subash. But I think that's the effect of keeping yourself in good company. So yeah, John, I agree with you. Surround yourself with people who, inspire you in little ways. I know Subash and John over the years, and each of them are a source of inspiration. And maybe I don't say it enough, but I think that surrounding ourselves with the right people is important. But what I wanted to say was, we spoke about wellness being self-directed, an active process, but it's also an evolving process, and I think we must understand that. With every generation we move into, our desires, what's important for us, what our body is capable of, what our minds are capable of, the shifts that are happening to us. It's really important to, I think, embrace these and be very kind to ourselves. Like we have to be kind to others, whether they're coaches or our clients or our employees. It all starts with us, and I feel often we beat ourselves up too much, to standards that don't serve us anymore, and we are evolving. So can this wellness goalpost keep shifting with every new decade or every half a decade you enter into your life? Reassess, drop what doesn't serve you anymore, shift. So, I used to be big on yoga at a point of time. Then I completely moved away from yoga. Today, I feel my heart calling me back to get into Ashtanga yoga. And, I really want to go into that space. It doesn't mean I'm fickle. It just means I'm changing. I'm evolving. I'm growing.
As with anything else, we continue to grow, we continue to evolve. And with that, we do come to the end of the session. It's been an absolutely fabulous conversation. I think each one of you bringing in slightly different and nuanced perspectives, and yet many of you being able to add to one another's point of view as well. So it's just been an amazing conversation. Thanks, Vijay, for having initiated this in the first place. And of course, thanks, John and Subash, for having come together so that we could really harness, I think, the combined wisdom that exists in all of you. So thanks once and all. And thanks to all of you who were here as audience. I think that also makes it really worthwhile. So thanks once again, and
Thank you.
good night to all of you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Sleep
Thank you.
well.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Anant. Fantastic
Thank you.
moderation
Thank you,
as
Anand.
always.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you,
Thank
Subhash.
Amazing.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Vijay,
you.
bye.